The sinking of the RMS Titanic on the night of April 14th to 5th, 1912, is often remembered as one of history's greatest maritime tragedies. More than 1,500 lives were lost when the world's most famous passenger liner struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank beneath freezing waters. For over a century, one question has continued to be asked. Could the disaster have been prevented? When the events leading up to the sinking are carefully examined, the answer becomes clear. The tragedy was not the result of a single unavoidable accident, but a chain of decisions, assumptions, and missed opportunities. At several critical moments, different choices might have changed the outcome. One of the most significant factors was speed. On the day of the collision, the Titanic received multiple wireless warnings from other ships about heavy ice along its route. These messages reported icebergs, field ice, and dangerous conditions directly ahead. Despite this information, the ship continued traveling at nearly full speed, about 22 knots. At such a high speed, the time available to react to an unexpected obstacle was extremely limited. If the Titanic had reduced speed after receiving repeated warnings, the lookout crew might have had more time to spot the iceberg, and the officers might have had enough distance to avoid it completely. Closely related to speed was the decision not to change course significantly. Some ice warnings were acknowledged, but there was no major deviation from the planned route. At the time, maintaining schedule and demonstrating the ship's performance were important priorities. However, a more cautious approach, slowing down or taking a more southerly path, could have reduced the risk of encountering dense ice fields. Environmental conditions that night made the danger even greater. The sea was unusually calm, and there was no moonlight. Normally, waves breaking against an iceberg create visible foam, making it easier to detect. But the calm water removed this visual signal. In addition, the dark, moonless sky made it difficult to distinguish the horizon. Under these conditions, standard navigation practices should have been adjusted. Slowing the ship would have been a simple but effective preventive measure. Another preventable issue involved communication. The Titanic's wireless system was highly advanced for its time and functioned continuously, but its primary role was handling passenger messages. These paid communications were given priority over navigational warnings. One critical message from the nearby ship Californian, which had stopped completely due to heavy ice, was never delivered to the bridge. The wireless operator on the Titanic was busy transmitting passenger traffic and asked the Californian's operator not to interrupt. If that warning had reached the offices, it might have prompted immediate caution. Even after the collision, opportunities existed that might have reduced the loss of life. At first, the seriousness of the damage was not fully communicated to passengers. Many people hesitated to board lifeboats because the ship still appeared stable and well-lit. Earlier and clearer communication about the danger could have encouraged faster evacuation and fuller use of available lifeboat space. Lifeboat capacity itself remains one of the most well-known preventable shortcomings. The Titanic carried lifeboats for only about half of the people on board. This number met outdated maritime regulations, which were based on ship tonnage rather than passenger capacity. However, the ship's design could have accommodated many more boats. The decision to carry fewer was influenced by aesthetic concerns and confidence in the ship's safety. If the Titanic had carried enough lifeboats for everyone, the disaster might still have occurred, but far fewer lives would have been lost. The evacuation process also revealed issues of training and preparedness. There had been no full lifeboat drill for passengers, and some crew members were uncertain about procedures. As a result, several early lifeboats were launched only partially filled. Better training, clearer instructions, and prior drills could have improved the efficiency of the evacuation. One of the most discussed missed opportunities involves the nearby ship Californian. It was only about 10 to 20 miles away and had stopped for the night due to ice. The Titanic fired distress rockets, which were seen from the Californian's deck. However, they were not interpreted as signals of a major emergency. The Californian's wireless operator had gone to sleep and did not receive the Titanic's distress calls. If continuous radio monitoring had been standard practice, the Californian might have reached the scene in time to rescue many more survivors. Design factors also played a role in whether the disaster could have been prevented or mitigated. The Titanic's watertight bulkheads did not extend high enough to stop progressive flooding once multiple compartments were breached. Higher bulkheads or a double hole along the sides might have allowed the ship to remain afloat longer, giving rescuers more time to arrive. Material limitations may also have contributed. Some of the rivets used in the bow area were made of lower quality iron that became brittle in cold temperatures. When the iceberg scraped along the hull, several seams opened as rivets failed. Stronger materials might have reduced the extent of flooding. However, it is important to understand that prevention does not depend on any single factor. The Titanic disaster was the result of a chain of events: high speed, ignored warnings, environmental conditions, communication priorities, limited lifeboats, incomplete training, and design limitations, all combined. If any one of several key decisions had been different: lower speed, better communication, more lifeboats, continuous radio watch, outcome could have been significantly less severe. The investigations that followed the disaster reached a similar conclusion. Both British and American inquiries determined that the loss of life was largely preventable. Their findings led to major reforms in maritime safety. Ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Continuous 24-hour wireless monitoring became mandatory. Regular lifeboat drills were introduced. The International Ice Patrol was established to track iceberg movements and warn ships in the North Atlantic. These changes showed that the tragedy provided important lessons. The sinking of the Titanic revealed the dangers of overconfidence in technology and the importance of preparing for worst-case scenarios rather than average conditions. Safety systems must be designed not just to meet minimum standards, but to handle unexpected events. Looking back, the question is not whether the iceberg could have been prevented. It could not. Icebergs were a known hazard in the North Atlantic. The real question is whether the risk could have been managed more carefully. The evidence suggests that it could have been. Slower speed and ice conditions alone might have prevented the collision entirely. Even after impact, better preparation and more resources could have saved hundreds more lives. The story of the Titanic remains powerful because it shows how disasters often develop gradually. Warning signs were present. Information was available. Opportunities to act existed. But each decision, taken individually, seemed reasonable at the time. Only in hindsight does the pattern become clear. In the end, the Titanic disaster was not inevitable. It was the result of human choices, technical limits, and a culture that trusted progress more than caution. That is why the tragedy continues to be studied today, not only as a historical event, but as a lesson in risk management, communication, and responsibility. More than a century later, the question of prevention reminds us of a simple truth. Major disasters are rarely caused by one unavoidable event. They happen when multiple small risks are underestimated, warnings are delayed or ignored, and preparation falls short of reality. The legacy of the Titanic is a lasting reminder that safety depends not on confidence, but on caution, readiness, and respect for the unexpected.